Meanwhile, the family member of a victim, David King, is concerned that the firearm is yet to be recovered.
I'm also worried because I don't hear anything in the news that say that they've been arrested with their firearms. So I'm just wondering as to, yes, they have been arrested, but where are the firearms? And can those firearms not be used again, maybe by people that have not yet been arrested? You know, that is really concerning.
Yeah.
I would have been much more relieved if they were arrested with their firearms, like the first suspect that was arrested.
Well, let's get into this discussion now. Police Minister Senzo Mchunu has told Parliament that the mastermind behind the Lusikisiki massacre is an inmate who orchestrated the crime from his cell. He's called for an overview of the parole system. This is to prevent people from re-offending. Let's discuss this now. And we're joined by Member of Parliament and DA Justice spokesperson Janho Engelbrecht, and alongside him is Godrich Gardee, whose daughter was allegedly killed by someone who was on parole. To both of you, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and a very good evening to you. Can I start with you, Mr. Gardee? The understanding is that your family is suing the Correctional Services Department for an amount of 18 million rand, and this is because Hilary Gardee, your daughter, your late daughter, was killed allegedly at the hands of a parolee. Just confirm that for us and tell us where matters are today.
Good evening, Koli, and good evening to our viewers. I would have thought that maybe we'll be talking about the parole system in South Africa and not about a personal matter of our family. But needless to say, we can confirm that the matter is still ongoing, and at the right time, the courts and the Department of Correctional Services will tell us what is happening, including the prosecution authority and the South African Police Services.
Yeah. We'll get deeper into this discussion, Mr. Gardee, but thank you for confirming that indeed the case is still before the courts. Mr. Engelbrecht, let's come to you. There are very troubling statements that were made by the Minister of Police, and this is understood to have been in front of the Portfolio Committee on Police in Parliament, and this is where he says the alleged mastermind in these 18 murders orchestrated this from behind bars. To your knowledge, is that indeed a fact that the Minister of Police is on record stating such before members of Parliament?
Well, good evening to you and good evening to the viewers. I don't know if it is factual, but I can confirm that it is most definitely possible for that to happen, given the large amount of contraband, of which, I mean, cell phones are the most common contraband that's doing the rounds in our prisons. That's not supposed to be there. And I must just say that this is, again, a case where parolee commits heinous crimes, where there's many instances and other examples of this. And this has been a long time coming. We've been hearing of a parole review of the system, and this is now the second term that I serve on the Correctional Services Committee. But as of date, we have not received any update in terms of exactly where this review of the parole system is. And as a portfolio committee, we didn't have an opportunity to give any inputs to that purported review of the system as of yet.
Yeah. Before I move on from you, Janho Engelbrecht, I'd like for you to just listen for a moment to a family member of one of the 18 victims who were killed in the Eastern Cape, because as you talk about the parole system, there is something very troubling that he has told us on this show tonight. And just have a listen for a moment before we continue the conversation.
We were informed by senior police officials that there is a prisoner who's currently serving his sentence and who was being prepared for parole as well, who was found to be implicated in the plan of this evil deed. And apparently they have, according to what I gathered, was that the parole has been revoked, and he will continue serving his sentence to the fullest. And apparently has also been removed from the prison that he was in to a more secured prison. But we have not yet been informed as to which prison is that.
Mr. Engelbrecht, that's David King. He is an uncle to one of the victims that was killed on that fateful night 2 weeks ago. When you hear statements like that, I know that tonight we were supposed to have the correctional services, but they have flatly refused to come on the show. What does that tell us about South Africa's parole system?
It tells us that it is dysfunctional. And I think it has been dysfunctional for a number of years already, because this is not the first instance where a parolee commits these unspeakable acts while out on parole. And also, if you remember, Thabo Bester had a big racket that he ran from inside a correctional facility, albeit a private facility. But notwithstanding, there's many of these instances that occur within our correctional facilities, which is absolutely shocking, and it is a very significant problem that we need to address.
Mr. Gardee, Janho Engelbrecht says the parole system is dysfunctional in South Africa. You are, as I mentioned earlier, you're suing the Department of Correctional Services, but I don't want to focus the attention on your personal matter. I'd like for you to just take us step by step as to what was supposed to have been done by the parole system in order to make sure that people do not fall victim to people who are out on parole and clearly have not been rehabilitated and basically are reoffending.
Yes, Toli. I think it is not about a dysfunctionality of the parole system. The question should be, is it desirable system? If so desirable, the question will be, what is it that needs to be done? You'll recall that a president has got the powers to pardon people serving sentence. You recall that a minister of justice has got powers to expunge criminal records and also to deal with the issues of criminal records. The question is, which are those criminal acts that are precluded from a pardon? Which are the criminal acts which are precluded from expunging of criminal records? If we can synchronize the provisions of a pardoning system, criminal records expunging system, and the parole system, because it cannot be that there are certain criminal acts that a president cannot pardon, but the very same criminal acts, you find that a parole board of people who have got no legal background, picked up from the street to be a parole board, can actually determine the future of a country. Releasing hardened criminals who have killed more than 5, 6, 7, 10 people just because there is a parole system, when actually a president is precluded from pardoning such a person. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the legislative requirement to synchronize this policy perspective on parole, pardoning, and expunging of criminal records? Most of that, if you look at the Correctional Service Act, it is such that it creates a lot of confusion. It creates an impression that correctional services can give people a parole willy-nilly, when actually, when it refuses, courts are very strict and very tough on correctional services. They order correctional services to release the very same hardened criminals, which the very same courts actually sentence to many years.
Yeah.
And the minister is also called upon to act and make a decision on parole. So the problem is in the legislative environment. For us to get this system right, we must be told from the beginning, which are those criminal conducts wherein if people are serving those sentences, they are not subject to parole.
Yeah.
Just like the president cannot pardon them, just like the minister cannot expunge their criminal record.
All
so
right.
It should apply mutatis mutandis on the issue of parole.
Okay. All right. So it would seem to me you are suggesting that specific offenses, there are those that should not be allowed, or for the people who've committed such offenses, parole should not be an option for those people who've committed such crimes. We'll get to that a little later in the discussion. Mr. Engelbrecht, before matters come before a parole board, before an inmate goes before a parole board, would that person have gone through the prison's rehabilitation process? And if so, how do prison officials come to the conclusion that this person, we are satisfied that he is now a rehabilitated inmate and is ready to be taken onto the parole system?
Well, if I can, I just want to make something clear here. Parole boards are not part and parcel of DC, of the Correctional Services Department. Parole boards are independent, and their decision is final. Now, there's a couple of things that they need to consider, and that a case management committee in the prison will compile a profile of any given prisoner. Once that prisoner applies for parole, then there's reports in that profile that needs to be considered, amongst others, psychologist reports and professional social worker reports. The inmate needed to have completed various programs, rehabilitation programs within the correctional system. And then once the parole board applies their minds, they then decide whether to grant parole or not. And there's certain conditions connected with the parole. So once an inmate breaks the conditions that he was released on, he goes back to jail and he will serve out the remainder of his prison sentence. But now the problem, from my perspective, is that I think the department is woefully underfunded. And some of those critical reports that needs to be considered by parole boards, like a psychologist report. So there's one psychologist for every 1,294 sentenced offenders as we speak right now in correctional services. And there's one professional social worker for every 161 sentenced offenders. Now, so the question, it's a mathematical impossibility for that amount, that workload to be dealt with by a single psychologist. If you look at the amount of parolees that were put, or inmates that were put on parole for the first quarter of this financial year, it was 3,729 offenders that were placed on parole. Now, with only 75 psychologists and 602 social workers employed by DCS, that means that each psychologist had to finalize on average a caseload of 50 profiles within that 3 months' time. Now, that number of profiles excludes, that's only approved profile. That's not those that were not approved, and that also excludes all the other work that they had to do.
Yeah.
So I think it is mathematically not possible for every person that were released on parole to have seen a psychologist. I know it's in the act, and I've asked a question to the minister about that, and he confirmed, no, this is exactly what needs to happen, and it does happen. But if you work out how many working hours is in a day, and you make the calculation, I don't know. These guys can't work 24 hours a day to get through this. It's impossible. So I very much doubt if every person that were placed on parole had a psychologist report in that case file before a parole.
Well, that would be very damning indeed. Let's then quickly evaluate. I'm still with you, Arno. Let's quickly then evaluate, once that person or those persons are released into the communities, who monitors them? Who is supposed to monitor them?
You have parole officers, and you know, they, part of the conditions, they have to go once a week and report, and they are monitored. And also, if once before you can be placed on parole, you must have a social structure, like family that you can go to, and to get employment and all of these things. Because if you look at the reason for this, we call it community corrections, is for someone to be reincorporated into society.
Yeah,
that's the main goal of this. Now, so I don't know if these parolees were absconders. That's also a possibility that they, and that needs to be investigated. So they were out on parole, but did they abscond?
yeah.
That's a serious question that needs to be answered. And there's lots of absconders, because obviously there are people that plays the system, and some of these inmates can be, you know, they know how it works. They know that they need to complete all of these things, and they need to say that, and then they know, okay, the probability of me receiving parole is very great.
All right.
They get out on parole and they disappear, and for that, you know, DCS doesn't have control over that, and they must abide by the decision of the parole board. And it's in the law. Otherwise, it's only the NCCS that can refer matters and say, no, well.
Yeah.
And the inspecting judge that can overturn a decision by the parole board as per legislation.
Mr. Gardee, without really getting into the merits of your personal case, was it found that the person who is accused of taking the life of your daughter, was it found that he had absconded from the parole system?
Toli, I wish to avoid answering that question, but as a matter of fact, in most instances where heinous crime have been committed by parolees, it goes without saying that that parolee actually was never under any supervision. If ever he was under any supervision, he actually absconded from the supervision. And unfortunately, the very same parolee will appear in court for an unrelated matter to the parole, and a complainant will withdraw the charges or will just get acquitted. Instead of correctional services pulling him back with his jacket and say, hey, my man, stay back. We can see that you have been acquitted here, but we have been looking for you for 9 months. We have been looking for you for 12 months or 2 years. You have not been signing a visitation register. You have not been reporting to the nearest police station. You have not been doing community work, etc. Yeah. It's never done. The problem is the IT system of the courts, the NPA, the police, and correctional services do not speak to each other. As you appear in a court, you look like you're appearing for the first time, and neither SAPS or correctional services or NPA IT system can tell that, well, in terms of the parole management system, this person who's appearing here has actually been being wanted for absconding from parole over a year or so. So I think the challenges of the IT system will have to be looked at.
Okay.
And furthermore, parole system is riddled with corruption. The very same correctional service officers who allow contraband things inside the correctional services are the very same one actually who go and look to the parole management system. And they even write that, no, we found Mr. Gardee, he's doing well. We found him, he's doing well. When actually the man has never been found, he may have given them an advance fee to say, hey, you won't find me in the next 6 months, just take this thing. So it is riddled with corruption. That's why there is a need of a legislative intervention to make sure that what the courts do, what the minister do, and what correctional services do, and what the police in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act do, and then it's actually brought together, and there is a synchrony in that.
All right, final thoughts. Janho Engelbrecht, earlier Mr. Gardee made mention of what he thinks are offences that should not be, or inmates should not be allowed to go on parole if they have committed those offences. Which, for you, are those offences where inmates should never be paroled?
Well, firstly, I believe in a rehabilitative system as opposed to a punitive system, because a punitive system simply does not work. However, if you look at extremely serious and violent crime, you sit with people that's really maladjusted, and they should not be released in society. Normally, some of those are, in the old language, they said criminally insane. You know, it's state patients, they are institutionalized for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
But if you look at child raping, you look at aggravated robbery, horrible things. I mean, these people should not be reintroduced to society, because I think there's something very wrong with the way that they perceive life around them, and they are maladjusted to such an extent that rehabilitation would not, I think, in my honest opinion, be very viable in such cases.
Gentlemen, I'm completely out of time. Thank you very much for your time. Janho Engelbrecht is the Democratic Alliance spokesperson on justice. And Mr. Godrich Gardee, you are a member of the EFF, but also for purposes of this discussion, still our thoughts are with you and your family, having lost a daughter.